Hi, I'm Dr. Avanti Kumar Singh. In over 20 years of practicing both Western medicine and Eastern healing traditions, the most important thing that I've learned is that healing is a journey we take together. So on this podcast, I'll be demystifying Ayurveda and other integrated medicine, showing how these simple, ancient practices are the keys to unlocking a healthy modern life. We are all healing catalysts because healing starts within. It starts with you, and it starts right now. Episode number 133. Hello, my beautiful friends. Welcome back to the Healing Catalyst podcast. I am so happy to be back with you again this week. Today, we're continuing with a seasonal series that we started earlier this year called 5 Questions. Now, we came up with this because I get so many questions from all of you through SpeakPipe, where you can leave me a voice message, or through my website or on Instagram. And so today I'll be doing a Q&A of 5 of the most common questions that you all ask me related to supporting your health during the seasonal shift to summer. And as you all know, this year is all about collaboration for me. And so I'm joined once again by Madeline Reeves, my business and marketing strategist and a close friend who happens to also be a yoga teacher and is very informed about all things health. I thought that she would be the perfect person for me to do these 5 questions episodes with. And I think you'll really love our conversation. A little about Madeline. Madeline is the founder and CEO of Fearless Foundry, a creative consultancy that supports ambitious people in building their branding, their marketing, and developing business strategies that allow them to make a really meaningful impact in the world. She's an outspoken force for promoting equity, collaboration, and community in business, and she spends time working with her clients, creating content, hosting the Finding Fearless podcast, and leading her growing team. In this 5 Questions episode, you're going to learn how to balance summer's fiery energy with practical tips and DIY remedies for maintaining balance and well-being during the hot summer months. From aligning with nature during the summer, to what foods to eat, to DIY skincare that you can make at home, to understanding the do's and don'ts for protecting yourself from the heat of the sun. I've got you covered. You know, last week during the summer solstice and the full moon, which were both on June 21st, I was really reminded of the importance of aligning our internal rhythms with the rhythms of nature. The summer solstice, which is the longest day of the year, is also a peak time of solar energy, and it symbolizes vitality and growth. Now, coupled with the full moon, it was sort of this astrological alignment that was perfect for internal reflection and manifestation of our dreams and wishes. And this powerful combination really reminded me of the healing power of syncing with nature's cycles. I remember a summer a few years ago when the heat was so unbearable, and I was really trying to maintain my regular routine. But I kind of found myself feeling really drained and irritable by midday. And that's when I tuned back into Ayurveda for guidance. By making just a few simple adjustments, I found I felt more balanced and more energized. And I want to share what I did with all of you. So grab your favorite drink, a cool drink, no ice though, you'll understand why in a minute. A pen and some paper for notes because this episode is packed with tools and tips. I am so excited to share this Q&A of how to support your health during the summer season. Hi, Madeline. I'm so excited to be back with you again to do another 5 Questions episode. And this time we're talking all about summer and some of the most commonly asked questions that we get about summer. So thank you for doing this with me.
I'm excited to be back. I feel like these episodes help ground me and get me ready for the seasonal change. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are, sort of the things that a lot of people are wondering about, why does it matter, to go from one season to the next? How does that make a difference in Ayurveda? So that's kind of what we're going to dive into today. So let's just dive in.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is really important for us to talk about a little bit is this notion about like, what is the Ayurvedic understanding of seasonal transitions and why is it so important? Because I think about people who haven't heard you talk about this before and don't know Ayurveda. So walk me through that a little bit.
Yeah. And so, really it comes down to the main sort of guiding principle of Ayurveda, which is when you live in harmony with nature, you will have optimal health, right? And so it's really about how do we transition from one season to the next, just as nature does. Animals, plants, everything in the universe transitions from one season to the next. Human beings should do the same. Now, if we think about it from an energetic perspective, because we're talking about, the three bioenergies or mind body constitutions of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, which are combinations of the five main elements that are in the universe that everything is made of, which is, space, air, fire, water, and earth, right? When we think about Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, those exist not only in human beings, but in everything in the universe, including the seasons, right? And so when we move from one season to the next, there is a dominant energy or a dominant bioenergy of each season. So now we're moving into summer. The dominant energy is Pitta, which is fire, which kind of just makes intuitive sense, right? We're going into the warm months of the year. Now, the other thing to think about is that when we transition, when we're coming out of one season and going to the next, the season that preceded, there is an accumulation of the dosha, of the predominant dosha of that season. So we're coming out of spring, and that is kapha season, which is water and earth. There is an accumulation of water and earth at the end of spring, which we need to actually eliminate before we move into summer. And so that's why this transition is so important, because if we don't actually eliminate the excess of the dominant dosha from the preceding season, then we carry into the next season and we have all kinds of symptoms. So, for example, if we don't get rid of all the kapha that we have accumulated in spring, that can cause a lot of problems as we move into summer. It can cause more allergies and congestion and pain, actually, all kinds of things that we don't want to deal with because of the excess of kapha. So we're moving into summer, pitta. So that's the reason that the transition is so important. We're trying to get rid of the dominant dosha from the preceding season going into the new season. So it's like we're trying to eliminate that, but we're also trying to set ourselves up from sort of a clean slate of the next dosha so that the pitta that will start to accumulate, we can actually handle that. We can eliminate what we don't need, right? Because if we're always playing catch up, then it just causes more symptoms. Hopefully that makes sense. It's a little bit convoluted sometimes, but
it's making a lot of sense. And it's as I think about kind of the things that I've been navigating with my own body and my own family as we move through this season. I'm really glad you mentioned allergies because that jumped right out for me. The other thing that I have been experiencing and navigating a little bit is like a little bit of gut trouble. And I think that that's because, dietarily, we need to be changing what we're eating and things like that. And I also, the image that came to my mind is my kids for the last couple weeks have been having these end of school kind of moments, end of school picnics. And I was thinking about you so much because we had this one of our first really hot days. And of course, luckily it aligned with the end of school picnic because half the time I feel like where I live, it always rains on those things. But we got there and I was looking at the spread. It was like a potluck. And suddenly you saw watermelon and you saw cucumber and you saw strawberries and you saw all of these, quenching foods because it was really hot out. And I was like, oh, we are starting to do this a little bit intuitively. But if you don't make those changes, I know how much it can affect your health. And so can you talk to me about kind of as we make this transition, what are the key principles of Ayurveda we need to keep in mind in the summer season to both go through kind of that cleansing of the prior dosha and to support ourselves with all this pitta energy?
Yeah. Okay. So let's back up a little bit and let's talk about, first of all, what is the Pitta dosha, right? Pitta, as I said, is the bioenergy or mind body constitution that combines the elements of fire and water, right? And we say that Pitta governs everything that is involved in transformation in the body. So metabolism, digestion, right? Those are things that are ruled by Pitta. which makes sense, right? Fire is, the metaphor in Ayurveda, the digestive fire for metabolism, right? And so it really is the thing. Pitta dosha is what controls how well we convert nourishment, food of any kind, anything that's coming into our five senses, into energy, and how well our body can function using that energy, right? We're getting energy from not only food that we're eating, but also the food that we're taking in through our eyes and through our ears, our relationships. Everything is food, right? So how well do we digest it? How well do we take what we need, keep what we need, and then get rid of what we don't, right? That's what Pitta is really about. When we talk about Ayurveda, we always talk about qualities of the different doshas, of the different elements. And the qualities of Pitta, as you could imagine, are hot, sharp, oily, light, very, very intense. They kind of are mobile and spreading, and liquid. Things that you would think of when you think of fire and water, right? Those are the qualities of those elements. And so those are the qualities of Pitta. Now, what does that have to do with what we're talking about? Well, in Ayurveda, there's that golden principle of like increases like and opposites reduce. And so when we're thinking about how to keep Pitta in balance through the summer months so that we don't have this huge accumulation at the end of summer, is to do things that are opposite, right? Like increases like, opposites reduce. So we look at those qualities of hot, sharp, oily, mobile, and we try to do the opposite to bring it into balance. So we want to decrease the hot that we have, right? If you put more hot on hot, it just gets hotter, right? So you want to cool it off a little. You want to add a little bit of heaviness so that you don't have all this light spreading fire, right? You want to sort of dull things out and sort of make them a little bit dull so it's not so sharp and penetrating. Does this make sense? So that's why it's so important to understand that.
Yeah, the visual that was coming to my mind actually, and it's interesting because whenever you talk, I kind of think about, okay, what is the body doing? And the visual that came to mind was like the difference between like laying at the beach and like going for a hike during the summer. Like one is very counter to what you should be doing because of the dosha of the season. And I imagined like that feeling you get when you kind of push yourself too hard in this intense time and you counter with intensity. What are you going to have? You're going to be sweaty. You're going to be having trouble breathing. You're going to be overworked, overwhelmed, versus like kind of embodying the lizard quality of like, no, I'm just going to lay here. I'm going to relax. I'm going to slow down. And this is really interesting because I think especially for those of us who live like somewhere where both you and I live, you live in Chicago, I live in Seattle. We have winters where, things kind of cocoon a little bit because the weather is so intense. But I feel like as a result, summers can be really go, 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 and all activity and all things go. And to me, that's always felt a little too much. And so as I'm hearing you talk about it, it's like, oh, because we're doing all the things that actually aggravate that Pitta energy.
Right, exactly. And so that's exactly what's happening is that summer, because it's Pitta season, right? It's more fire and water. It's going to aggravate Pitta that is within us, right? So it's going to then increase those qualities, and it can cause all kinds of symptoms if it goes out of balance within us. And each of us is different, right? Each of us, you have a certain amount of Pitta. I have a different amount of Pitta. Everyone who's listening has different amounts of Pitta. We all have Pitta within us, right? Now, depending on how much we have, that's how much we can tolerate, right? So someone who has a lot of Pitta, or maybe Pitta is a dominant dosha for them, their ability to really regulate in the summer is a little bit harder. And it's really important because if they even get a little too much Pitta inside of them, which already has a lot of Pitta, they're going to go out of balance and they're going to have symptoms, right? So as soon as you start to go out of balance, you start to have, the signs of sort of aggravated Pitta. Things like you mentioned, right? Increased sweating, lots of heat. Really, you can imagine it's like fire trying to come out of the body. That's what's trying to happen, right? So it's going to show up as inflammation. So lots of injuries. It can show up as acidity. So you can have acid reflux, skin rashes, right? Literally heat's trying to come out of the body and through the skin. The skin's the largest organ of the body. You might have acne. You might have heat rashes, lots of irritability and anger, right? These are all the things, if you think about it, those are all fiery types of symptoms that are trying to escape from the body. So again, when you have too much pitta, pitta on pitta, so a pitta person in a pitta season, and then you add pitta activities and pitta foods, it's a disaster. It's just a lot of heat, right? So I'm giving these visuals because I think it's so important for people to understand why it's so important then to do so many of the lifestyle changes that we talk about and dietary changes in the summer, or as we're going from one season to the next. You start to understand, you're like, oh, I need to counterbalance. I need to balance out the things that I am doing in my everyday life so that I don't have that overload of pitta. I don't have that accumulation and then all those symptoms. So that's kind of really the why of why it's so important, and then also how it correlates to pitta and the pitta dosha.
It makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that, this is why I'm so excited for Ayurveda to spread more, especially here in North America. Because I think about summer, especially the past couple of years, there's been a lot of conflict in our culture. And I think it is because of this pent up, fiery energy. So talk to me about the very tangible things that we can be doing to cool that off and to really change the internal dynamic and help ourselves really regulate is what's coming to mind. It's like, we, especially in a climate that, let's be honest, is getting hotter and hotter, we've really got to be conscious of what we can be doing to regulate ourselves.
Yeah. And so really it comes back to a certain couple things. And, I will give you some ideas of specific things you can do. But I think, again, I'm always about understanding the principles, because that way you can sort of regulate yourselves on a daily basis without actually remembering the exact things. You'll understand the principle. So again, if we go back to this idea of opposites reduce, right? Like increases like opposites reduce. We know that we want to do the opposite thing. So what we're trying to do is balance out this fire and this water that are the two elements of pitta, right? And so a couple of things that we can do is we want to balance out the heat, but we also want to make sure that we have enough moisture, right? Enough hydration. So a couple of things that we can do is really to think about, how do we cool down in the summer? Because the heat is the major issue that always affects most people, especially, as you said, as the climate is changing, in the world, we're seeing all the effects of that. I mean, this week in Chicago, it's 100 degrees. Literally, it's anywhere from 90 to 100 degrees. We have never had that where it's been consistently like that at the beginning of June. I mean, we know that something's happening in the climate. So how do we keep ourselves cool? Well, there's a couple things we can do. We can do it with diet, right? We'll talk about dietary changes. So you really want to think about foods that are cooling, fresh fruits, fresh vegetables. And again, go by what nature is doing. Nature's providing all these beautiful, like you said at the picnic that you were with at your kids, all the watermelon and cucumbers. And, that was all to help us cool down. So you really want to increase those cooling foods in your diet. You want to stay hydrated. These are very simple things, drink cooling beverages, not iced beverages, but cooling ones. Add cooling spices, whether it's peppermint or fennel or aloe, right? These are all things that are very cooling to the body. Fruit juice if you need to in the summer. And then another thing is to really make sure that you cool off in your environment. Really spend time in cool, shaded areas. You want to avoid that excessive sun exposure in the middle of the day. Now, these are things that we've all grown up knowing, right? Our parents told us to do this when we were young, but now you understand why. There's a very tangible why, because we want to make sure we're balancing out that heat of summer. So those are some of the things that we can do with cooling. Hydration, right? Easy things. Make sure that you're drinking plenty of water. Make sure you're eating those hydrating foods that have a high water content. You can add something like aloe vera to your diet that will help to cool. So those are some of the specific, cooling and hydrating practices that you can do.
It's interesting. I was experiencing, like I said, some kind of like gut stuff the last couple of weeks. And intuitively, there were two things that I started doing. The first was I bought aloe vera and I started kind of incorporating it into my smoothies. And my
Mm-hmm.
smoothies have been turning to fresher, like not frozen berries, but now I'm getting
Right.
fresh berries because they're on sale in the market. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, I've got to, eat them while they're fresh kind of thing. And then the other thing I started doing was chia water is like a thing that I like when
Mm-hmm.
my belly gets a little, unsettled, is I'll add, my kids call it frog water because I'll add lime juice and chia seeds. And
Yeah.
obviously then when they plump up, they look kind of like frog eggs. And so they'll be
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, mom's drinking her frog water. But both of those things
Mm-hmm.
I now know are cooling and kind of settling my system.
Right.
And I'm laughing because I have it sitting here right now.
Yeah, no, those are all things that are helpful. I mean, think about the things that, maybe your parents or your grandparents would make in the summer. There's a reason they were doing that. It was all to provide this hydration, to provide this cooling. That was the reason they were doing those things, and they were using things that were available in nature. Mother Nature is a lot smarter than we are. She provides
Mhm.
what we need during the different seasons. So in the summer, it's all these cooling herbs and spices, cooling fruits and vegetables, right? To increase that hydration and to cool our bodies down and our minds also. So those are some important things. Some other things that you can do as far as routines go, because we're going to get to the dietary components in a minute. I know that that's a really commonly asked question. So we're going to do a whole question about that. But like seasonal routines, right? So the morning routine that you can do, and this is really, again, to pacify that pitta, to bring that pitta, that fire into balance. A morning routine, things like if you're doing a self massage in the morning, some abhyanga, which is a practice in Ayurveda to help settle the nervous system, to pull out toxins from the body. You want to use cooling oils in the summer. Things like coconut oil or sunflower oil. Those are a lot more cooling. And you want to follow that with like a very lukewarm shower. No hot showers, hot baths, things like that. Again, cooling, but you're changing the kind of oil you're using in the practice that you're doing. Exercise, like you said, you don't want to be doing these high intensity hikes. If you're going to do them at the cooler times of the day, in the morning or in the evening, not in the middle of the day. That's just going to overheat you, increase your pitta, cause all sorts of, injuries. I always tell this, this story. When I first started practicing Ayurveda and actually consulting, I had quite a few patients who would come to me who are really, really athletic, like athletes who, marathon all summer, especially in Chicago. It's marathon season here, right? They were doing all these marathons and they'd come in with all of these injuries because they were highly competitive, right? Because they're running these races. They have a lot of pitta in them. It's pitta season and they're doing pitta activities. It just was, again, a recipe for increased injuries, increased inflammation, right? So if you're doing those kinds of exercise, if you're doing like intense running, marathoning, biking, all those things, do them in the morning and the evening, not in the middle of the day. So you could instead do some, a little bit gentler exercise, maybe some swimming or walking, again, early morning, late in the evening, that type of thing when the temperatures are cooler. So you want to shift your exercise. And then, the rest and relaxation. Summer is a really fun time to be outdoors, to be with family, to be with friends. There's tons of things going on. Avoid the sort of the need to do everything all the time because that increases the amount of fire, the amount of pitta. So you want to balance that out with some rest, some relaxation, some downtime, some space, right? That, needing to slow down that we all feel in the summer. Don't like fight that urge because there's so much to do. So those are
Yeah.
some things to think about routines.
I feel like you just set down the gauntlet for me. That's the challenge I want to put forward for myself because I feel like last summer, and partially it was because we were in a smaller home. And so we just needed to get out. But it was that push because there's so much that happens during summer. I felt like every night we were at a concert in the park or going to the movie or play
Exactly.
date or trip or this or that. and you just kind of end up feeling a bit ragged, like,
Right.
versus, this summer I'm like, okay, like laying in the yard on a blanket. I'm going to stack up some good books.
Mhm.
I'm going to take a couple weeks off. Like, those are the changes I'm trying to shift and see in my life this summer because, otherwise you just kind of like careen into fall and it
Yeah.
kind of feels like a really hard crash, especially when the kids went back to school and things like that.
Exactly. Exactly. And then all that pitta is accumulated and you're going to have symptoms at the end of the summer too. So it's all about balancing. It's not saying that you shouldn't do those things because actually summer is that time of sort of that joy, that joie de vivre, it's sort of like that, time to be playful and light. And so doing those things, going to the park, seeing the movie in the park, going to the concerts, those are all really important because it taps into that playful energy of summer. But at the same time, it's really important to regulate that, to make sure that you're balancing that with the rest and relaxation that creates that cooling sort of that time to just bring it down a little bit. That's important in the summer too. So I really like what you're saying about balancing that out.
What would you offer in terms of, because I think the other thing, and again, you can tell I'm in this certain season of mom mode where it's like I've got kids under teenagers, so I'm still responsible for like keeping them entertained all summer.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about activities. What are the things that we can be doing to kind of calm the energy down, because the other thing I think about is like evenings are so challenging in my home during this season because it's light until like 10
Yeah.
o'clock at night.
Yep.
And so like getting everybody to wind down and getting everybody to get the rest they need.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about like what kind of activities we can be doing to kind of balance that bright intensity of the pitta energy.
Yeah. And you're right. That's a good point because the days are longer and it's light out. Everybody wants to be awake. And you know what? In the summer, that's okay. You're adjusting with what nature is doing. And so you're going to stay up a little bit later. But I do think what you're saying is really important is that to sort of bring the energy down a little bit, like be awake, but maybe doing some things that are more mindful, right? Whether it is, using some sidewalk chalk and just drawing outside or blowing some bubbles. Those are fun things, right? That you can do outside that have that playful energy, but they're also not, it's not like you're running around playing an active game or, getting really riled up and doing something competitive, right? So you're kind of doing some things that are playful. So maybe it's, drawing or doing some other mindful activities, meditation, breath work, guided meditation. Those are all things, listening to music. Those are all things you can do together. The other thing that I'm thinking about as you're talking about kids is that I actually think that the summer is a really good time to practice these mindfulness activities with your kids, with your spouse, with your partner, your friends, whoever. It's a really good time to really practice and build up those skills so that when you go back into the fall of that busy time of school, of work, of all the things that start to happen, you've sort of cultivated these skills again. You've kind of, sharpened them up a little bit and gotten back into meditating or into breath work. I used to do that with my kids in the summer, was really practice these tools so that they would have those tools in their side pocket when they went back to school and had lots of things to do. So, things you could be doing with your kids is, maybe you're doing every evening, you're doing 5 minutes of breath work together or doing a guided meditation together or listening to binaural beats on one of the apps, and lying down in your, outside on the grass or, in your living room on the floor and doing some meditation. Those are really nice things to do, I think.
That made me think we had an evening a couple nights ago where, again, it was like the energy was really high and we'd gone to see a movie. And so, that kind of gets everybody hopped up and we needed that calming. And it was like, oh, we're going to listen to some nature sounds, like kind of like a sleep sounds, and it was just the sounds of like kind of like a running stream. And it was amazing to me how quickly my littlest one went from like peak, like I can't sleep mama to like out to like a light,
Yeah.
But it's really, those things are just really helpful in kind of like regulating and counterbalancing. The other image that came to mind, and I'm like, oh, this is such a mindful thing. And it's something I remember a lot of childhood is campfires. Like a lot of people go
Uh-huh.
camping or go out in
Hmm.
nature, and just to sit by a fire and, just kind of like tell stories or just to be,
Yes. Yep.
is a very like, calming and grounding ritual that is, a lot of my part of my childhood, like summer memories. And
Hmm.
I was like, oh, we were kind of doing that naturally, even
Yeah.
though, it's not something we were consciously like cultivating.
Exactly. And when you're saying campfire, the thing that I think of right away is the aroma of campfires. That's like
Mm,
such a nostalgic smell for me. And so
mm,
it made me think of aromatherapy too. That's actually something you can also incorporate into your evenings, using essential oils that are cooling and calming, things like sandalwood, jasmine, rose is a beautiful one. Put those in diffusers, put them in, an oil. You could have everybody, just do like a little foot massage at the end of the day, that type of thing. There's lots of ways to incorporate so many of these practices in your own way and sort of adjust them to your family and to what feels good for you. But again, it's that idea of cooling things down, slowing things down. That will help to balance that pitta, fiery energy of summer.
I'm chuckling a little because I love the oil massage of the feet, because there's this moment every day, every summer day, where I have to go, because my kids always want to pile in my bed, and I have to go wash your feet because they've been running around
Yeah.
barefoot outside, and they come
Yeah.
into my room and their feet are like black. But I'm like, oh, that could be a nice addition to that. It's like,
Yeah.
go wash your feet and then we'll rub them with oil. But again, that's part of summer, the barefoot running around,
Right.
it's cool. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the question we know that everybody is waiting for, right? Is all of the dietary stuff. And we know that
Mhm.
people love your recipes. And there's so many I've gotten from you that are so helpful and so just beautiful and easy. And that's, I think, one of the things I love about cooking during this time of the year is, like, to your point, Mother Nature like gives us so much
Yeah.
that requires so little in terms of
Mhm.
preparation.
Yep.
It's not like, the winter where we're making these soups and stews that take a lot of
Mhm.
time. It's usually just things we can throw together quite quickly. So
Yep.
talk to me about, the things that we should, one, be incorporating from a foods perspective, and
Mhm.
perhaps maybe two, what should we maybe, do less of?
Right.
And then also, are there any foods that you really look forward to or you make a
Mhm.
point to make for your family during this time of year?
Yeah, for sure. So let's start with foods that you should favor. Okay. So again, in that whole idea of counterbalancing the heat of summer, you want to favor foods that are cooling, that are hydrating. And then the third thing to think about is that they should have sweet, bitter, and astringent tastes. In Ayurveda, there's 6 tastes that we have, and there are certain ones that will either increase a dosha or decrease a dosha. And so
Mm.
sweet, bitter, and astringent will help to decrease and sort of keep in balance the pitta dosha. And so that's why we'll look at those. So let's talk about cooling foods. That's pretty easy. That's what's available in nature. We've already talked about that. Things that are cooling and hydrating, actually, both of them kind of go together. Cucumbers, melons, leafy greens. As far as herbs, cilantro is very cooling. These are all things that will really help to cool down the body and the mind. Melons, watermelon, cantaloupe, honeydew, all of the leafy greens that you get at the farmer's market, spinach, kale, Swiss chard, all of those are nutrient dense. You can use them in salads. You can use them in smoothies, lightly sauteed. That's another thing, is that you don't want to have all of these vegetables and fruits raw. You do want to cook some of them down because it can be hard for the body to digest. If you're going to have any raw fruits and vegetables, make sure it's in the middle of the day. Otherwise, you want to kind of just lightly saute them or cook them, because in the morning and the evening, your body doesn't have as a robust of a digestion. It's harder for it to digest. So you want to sort of cook on an external fire so that your internal fire doesn't have to work so hard. So those are some of the cooling foods, hydrating foods, right? Again, all of the fresh fruits, juicy fruits, those are great in the summer because they have a lot of water content in them. Coconut water is a great one. It's isotonic. It helps with hydration, cooling. It has a lot of electrolytes in it, which will help to maintain your fluid balance in the summer. Fresh juices. I'm not a big proponent of fresh juices because of the sugar content, but in the summer, a little bit is really a good idea. Now, what we're talking about is a small little juice glass, like, a shot glass. And you could, maybe add more water or some sparkling water to that. Having a huge 8-ounce or 10-ounce glass of juice that is all sugar, that's not good for you. So, have some fresh juice, but moderate. And again, that's going to help to hydrate. And then as far as the sweet, bitter, astringent tastes, things like milk, dairy, if you do have it, that is actually something that's really cooling and nourishing in the summer. If you add a little bit of cardamom to that, it can help to increase the cooling effect of dairy. Other things that are really good in the summer are things like rice, white rice, basmati rice. It's very light. It's easy to digest. It has a naturally sweet taste to it and it's cooling. You wouldn't think of rice as sweet, but it does have a sweet taste. And then legumes, things like mung beans, lentils, chickpeas, all are cooling foods. They have a lot of protein in them. They have that astringent and bitter taste that will help to balance pitta. So those are some ideas of foods to favor. Questions about those?
No, but there's two things that came to mind. One, my mouth started watering as soon as you said dairy and cardamom. I was thinking about cardamom ice cream. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, of course we have ice cream in the summer because we need that like sweet but cooling, right? And recently my son was standing in the driveway and just going, I wish the ice cream truck would come by our house here, right? Because at his dad's house, there's an ice cream truck that comes by. But that's like, again, a core memory of summer, but essential, right? It's that hottest part of the day. The ice cream truck comes by, you get that sweet, you get that cooling, and you take a moment to settle, especially if you've been running around the neighborhood with all the kids, right? And then the other thing that came to mind was I think this legumes piece is really important because especially if you're somebody who favors, a meat-free or a more meatless diet, there is this kind of challenge, I think, this time of year in terms of protein, right? And so it's like, a lot of the things are kind of not as protein heavy this time of year. And so it's really important to think about how do you incorporate, those sources into what you're eating. And I was thinking again, back to that school picnic table, there's a lot of vegans and vegetarian families that the school my kid goes to. And there was cool chickpea salad and there was a beautiful lentil salad with fresh herbs. And I was like, oh yeah, that's such an intuitive thing. Because even though these are really nutrient dense, they're lighter to eat, especially like chickpea, I feel like is a great one. Yeah.
Yeah. And exactly. And go back to, again, the recipes that you grew up with, that you commonly had in the summertime. And that will give you ideas of the foods to favor in the summer. It's very intuitive. This is part of human history. It's not just South Asia, right? Ayurveda, everybody thinks that they need to eat Indian food to be eating Ayurvedically. That's just not true, right? You can think about any culture that you come from, your family history. Think about what recipes your mothers and grandmothers and aunts and uncles and family made during the summer. Get some clues and ideas from that, and that will tell you what to eat in the summer.
I instantly think of my grandmother lived in Kentucky, and everyone would have these little, not even a stand, like a table in their driveway. And you would be driving back to my grandmother's house, and that table always had cucumber. It always had tomatoes, and it always had watermelon. And there was just a little honesty box. You'd put, a couple dollars in. And so every night at dinner, cucumber and tomato were served because one, it was abundant, and two, again, helping us cool down and hydrate.
Yep, exactly. I love to think about the things from the past. It's nostalgic, but it also gives you so much information about the healing properties of food and the medicine that is in food. Our ancestors have used it for centuries. So just go back to that. Foods to avoid. We'll move to that really quickly. Really common sense, right? Things that are going to increase heat. Those are things that you should really avoid and sort of really regulate in the summer. Spicy foods, chili peppers, garlic, onions, those are all fiery. They'll increase the amount of heat. Just moderate those. Salty foods, right? Again, anything that's processed, salted nuts, pickles, those kinds of things are going to increase your fire. Anything that is sour, so yogurt, sour cream, fermented foods, you really want to regulate those in the summer because those will increase fire again. So those are really the things to avoid. Just don't increase the fire. It's kind of intuitive. Salty, sour, and spicy foods are really going to cause an increase in fire.
Okay. Okay. It's interesting. The pickles one surprised me. Can you tell me a little bit more about this? Because, and again, I'm
Yeah.
thinking very American here, but I feel like there's a lot of barbecues that happen, right,
Yeah.
during summer.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of like American diet is like, coleslaw and pickles and like stuff like
Hmm.
that. So say a little bit more about this big meat one.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point here is not to eat like a whole jar of pickles or a whole vat of coleslaw, right? Having it as a condiment with something else is a different story. It's the high salt content in pickles and then the fermentation in vinegar. Those are things that are going to cause an increase in fire. So you just want to moderate how much of that you're having. You know, I think that's really, again, it's just a condiment. It's just something to be aware of. Because if you're having things like kimchi, pickles,
Yeah.
kombucha, and yogurt. Like if you're having all of these things in one day, that could cause an overload and increase your fire. But if you're just having it as a condiment, it's totally fine. It's not a big deal.
Okay, that's super helpful. What about as I'm starting to like season things,
Mm-hmm.
because inevitably one of the things that we want to do this time of year is one, again, work with what nature offers us, but also maybe transition the palate a little bit to
Mm-hmm.
things that, are going to be aligned. So talk to me
Yep.
about if I'm cooking, what are the herbs and spices I'm reaching for?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm glad you brought that up because spices are medicine. They're like your
Mhm.
greatest medicine cabinet that you can have. Cooling spices that are really good to use in the summer are things like coriander, fennel, mint, aloe vera, cilantro. Cilantro, coriander are, cousins of the same thing. These are all really, really great cooling spices and herbs. Coriander can be used for cooking as a garnish. Fennel, again, you can chew after a meal. It helps with digestion and cools the body. So you could use it as a tea also. Mint,
Mm.
a lot of us have used mint in our cooking, whether it's in salads or teas or drinks. Aloe vera juice, you mentioned that you added aloe vera juice to your smoothies. You can do that. You can just have a little shot of it every morning too. And then again, cilantro, that's an easy one to, chop up and add to a salad, add to vegetables. You can even put it into smoothies. I add it to a smoothie, a green smoothie. Those are all great herbs and spices to use in the summer.
Mm. I love it. And again, these things are abundant. Like I always think about like my mint plants are just like overgrown
Yeah.
during the summer, right? So they need
Yeah.
to be eaten, and what better way to incorporate and put it into the things that we're making.
Mm-hmm.
This one is the one that I'm obsessed with. And for context, I'm recording this in Florida and I went out by the pool the first day here and there were so many young girls who were out getting their tan on and the mother
Mm-hmm.
in me and the former like girl who loved to tan in me wanted to shake all of them and go, you're going to regret this. You need to be gentle to your
Yeah.
skin.
Yeah.
And talk to me about that. What are the things that we need to be doing? Because especially again with a sun that is getting more and more intense,
Mm-hmm.
what is the skincare remedies? What are the things that we need to be doing to protect and care for our bodies during this hot time of the year?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. First of all, don't sit out in the sun in the middle of the day. It's bad for your skin. The UV, I mean, we know all the reasons that we shouldn't be tanning, et cetera. So I'm not going to go on that tangent here. But really, you want to do the same things that you're doing for your food. You want to think about that on your skin. Your skin is your largest organ. So whatever you're feeding it, whatever you put on it, you're actually feeding your skin, you're feeding your body. You can think about it the same way. So you want to use cooling ingredients on your skin, things that have sandalwood paste, cucumber, rose. These are all beautiful ingredients to use on your skin to help with heat rash, to help with sunburn, to help with acne. These are all things that you can use. So, some really great cooling face masks that you can make at home. If you just use sandalwood and some rose water, you can mix those together and make like a little paste and then put that on your face and neck, leave it on for 15 to 20 minutes and then rinse it off. That's one that you can make. Something you can do with cucumber. Again, it cools the skin and you can add some yogurt to that. That will soothe and sort of nourish the skin as well and hydrate it. So if you do some cucumber, some yogurt, blend it into a paste again, and then apply it to your face and neck for 15 minutes. Rinse off with cool water. That's another one. And then another one you can do is you can use rose water, mist it on your face during the day to cool it off. You can use aloe vera gel. This is one that we use a lot in the United States for sunburn or heat rash. You can put a little bit of aloe vera gel on. Those are some really good things to use for your skin. We already talked about some of the oils to switch to. Coconut oil, if you're going to be doing any kind of abhyanga or foot massage. You can also use something called Brahmi oil that you can get in an Ayurvedic dispensary or store. That can also be used for facial massage because it's cooling. It'll help with inflammation. So those are great. And then another one is turmeric. Turmeric and yogurt together, you can make a mask with that. It really helps with cooling any areas that have been sun exposed. It has anti-inflammatory properties, antioxidant properties in the turmeric, and then the yogurt will cool the skin. So again, you're kind of combining all these spice medicines and foods for their different properties and making a simple mask or a simple balm to put on heat rash, sunburn, etc. So those are some easy things that you can do.
What I love about that is like, those are things that you have in your kitchen, right?
Yes.
Like you already have them. It's so easy to do those things.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I just think about, how do we care for ourselves? How do we care for, often my littlest one runs really hot and in the summer, he'll get heat rash on his body because again, he's running around and perhaps his skin is too sun exposed or it just gets too hot. And I always know that moment where I take his shirt off and I see it on his back. And so I was like, oh, rose water. That's something I always have in my home. Like I could spray him down with that and help him cool off and take a cooling shower and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, you can get rose water in like most pharmacies and like natural food stores. And if you just put it in a little spritzer bottle, I could carry it around in my bag with me in the summer. Yeah. It's really refreshing in the summer.
Anything else we can be doing to just, as we think about that sun exposure, protecting, any other practices? I mean, I think some of this feels very like we should know, but again, when we're running around, when we're busy, we maybe forget to do some of these.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's all the things that we grew up knowing, right? Again, think about the natural sort of cycles of the day and the path of the sun. Use that as your guide. When the sun is highest in the sky in the middle of the day, you want to stay out of the heat and not expose your body because it's also the highest UV rays, really between like 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., especially like noon to 1. That's the hottest time of the day. The sun is the strongest. Just stay out of the direct sunlight. Make sure that you're wearing protective clothing, longer sleeves, a hat, sunglasses. These are all things that we all kind of know. You want to really make sure that you're wearing light, breathable fabrics, natural fabrics, cotton, linen. They allow the skin to breathe, but also protect. Also helps the body to stay cool. And then again, colors, use light colors. We all kind of lighten up what we're wearing. You don't want to be wearing really dark colors in the summer. That's just going to increase the amount of heat. So those are just some simple things to think about in the summer.
So one of the things that I think is really hard to manage during this time of the year is energy. We've talked about this a lot, but it's like there's the high highs and the low lows of summer. And I think about all the times where I burn out or my kids are melting down. It's literally because we're not like managing, the fatigue and the heat and all of these pieces well. And so how can we do that better? What are some Ayurvedic ways we can really manage our energy levels during these hot months?
Yeah. So, I think that's a really good point is that, again, in the summer, we want to do everything, but really thinking about how do we slow down? How do we add some rest and relaxation? How do we add some cooling practices to our day? Right. So I'm always going to start with sleep. I'm a doctor, so I'm always going to say aim for 7 to 8 hours of sleep. You really want to make sure that you're sleeping in a cool, dark, quiet environment that really, really promotes and supports sleep, and use light fabrics for your bedding. That will really help. So that's the first thing. And even though, the day is, longer, that still means that you still want to make sure that you're making sure that you have enough sleep, right? It's not an excuse to stay up until 11 o'clock and then wake up at 4 o'clock or or sleep later or whatever. You want to make sure that you have a regular schedule with your sleep. Another thing that you can do is take a little rest in the middle of the day. The hottest time of the day, it's a good time to be inside. Maybe take a 20-minute nap, or just chill out for 20 minutes. You're going to eat your lunch. Maybe you go for a little walk around the park, and then you just come and sit down and just chill for a little while. Really practicing some relaxation. We talked about that, doing some mindfulness activities, breath work, guided meditation as a family, or just adding that in your evenings to sort of cool down and cool off. That's a really nice thing. One of the breath works that you can do is something called shitali, which is really almost like you're breathing out of a straw. And it's really just sort of, you're sitting and you're going to basically roll your tongue into a tube, inhale deeply through it, and then exhale through your nose. So it's like you're sipping through a straw is what you're doing with shitali. And that will cool down. If you just do it, even while you're listening right now, everybody who's listening, you can actually feel that it cools you off. So that's the shitali breath. That's a really good one. And then, as far as, yoga goes or exercise, we've already talked about some of the exercises that you can do: gentle stretching, walking, swimming. But then if you're doing yoga, doing some more restorative, gentle practices that are on the floor, something like, reclining bound angle pose or child's pose or legs up the wall. These are all things that are relaxing and, again, cooling. They slow you down. Those are really good practices in the summer.
My big takeaway is this is not a time for going to the hot yoga studio and powering it out. No. These are times for slow and gentle practice, and really, really trying to figure out how can you still, move through the heat and intensity in summer, but where can you kind of calm it down? Where can you slow it down? And I think the key is that we have to be intentional in those things, because summer goes so quick, it goes so fast. And so if we're not taking the time to find that slowness or find that stillness, it's just going to, pass us in a blink.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's the name of the game is, cool it down, slow it down. That's the way you want to think about everything that you're doing. So incorporate that in your diet, in your self-care practices, in your movement, in your activities, and that will help to decrease that accumulation of pitta that can cause all the symptoms that we see in the summer. So that's really sort of, if the one thing you can remember from this episode is that, then I think I've done my job today. I think is that 5 questions? Yeah, we've done it.
That was it. We did it.
Okay, amazing. Madeline, thank you so much. I hope that this helps everybody that's listening. Thank you for helping me get through a lot of interesting questions. So thanks.
Thank you for the wisdom. I'm really excited to start instituting these and to come back and report how it went too. I think there's a lot of easy, tangible things that people can take away from this. And I'm excited to see your blog this summer too, with all of you always have the best recipes. So I'm excited to make some good foods for my family.
Yeah, we'll be adding some recipes for food, and then also a lot of the skincare that we talked about, some of those home DIY masks that you can make. We'll put those into a blog too, so you guys can look for those. Thanks again for listening to The Healing Catalyst. If you love what you heard, please hit follow and pass it along to a friend. And if you're feeling really inspired, please rate and review so that others can find this podcast more easily. To learn more, head to avantikumarsingh.com. And to connect with me directly, find me on Instagram at avantikumarsingh. I'll be back next week and hope that you will be too. Until then, remember, with the right catalyst, you have the power to activate your own healing, because healing starts within.